There are some things that you just don't want to get wrong, and that's exactly where we are in this section of the Epistle of James. Hi, I'm Joel, and welcome to Armchair Theologian and our ongoing series, Jesus According to Jake, a study on the Epistle of James. Today we're going to be dealing with the thesis statement of the Epistle of James in chapter 1. But as we dive into that, I just want to present you with a thought. What does it look like when you get something completely wrong? Now, we'll do a low-stakes example with this and just think about something simple like a mystery story, right? When I was in college, I loved the show CSI, Crime Scene Investigation. I'd watch it on a weekly basis. I had friends that watched it as well, and we'd get together and watch episodes. And I got to the point where if an episode was in syndication, I could tell you what the outcome of the crime was within the opening sequence. I had friends that had theory that if someone did not meet their demise within the opening segment of the episode, if they were still alive at the theme song of the show, that they would make it through the episode. This was just kind of a theory that they came up with on their own. By and large, it seemed to work, but then there were episodes where it didn't. There were characters that passed away in the middle of the episode. So they developed this theory, but it didn't always hold. And that's kind of what we run into with this section of James, is that there is a theory that you might develop that is not true. You see, with the writers of CSI, they never agreed to this idea of, well, if they're alive at the credits, they're going to live. That was just something that we came up with as viewers. An idea that we're going to run into here in chapter 1 is, where does temptation come from? Where do trials come from? And there's a thought process that we can buy into that does not actually mirror the truth. So our passage for this video is James chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. In this passage, James says, "Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my dear brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creation." Here's the hazard that we run into, is we see that the passage says, "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trials." And there can be a temptation there to say, well, because there's a blessing that flows forth from perseverance through the trial, then maybe this trial is coming from God because there's a blessing at the end. James is keen on showing to us God uses these things. He brings about blessing in our lives through this perseverance, through the trial, through the temptation, but he himself is not the author of the temptation. God is not the one that is tempting you, because evil does not come from God. God is not the origin of evil. It is the absence of God that is the nexus of evil. Now, there may be a few things in this passage that kind of pique your curiosity. For me, I sat there and wondered, what does it mean to have been approved? And really, that word approved comes from a Greek word meaning completion, right? So once you come to the end of this period of persevering through trial, that's when you receive the crown of life. Now, we see an interesting perspective in this passage. What James conveys to us is that there is a progression, that there is a family lineage to be found with temptation. He says that temptation comes from our own desires. So lust here is just the general sense of any kind of carnal desire, anything that is just a desire outside of what is good. And what we find is that these desires become the mother of sin. They conceive sin, and when sin is accomplished, the child of sin is death. This is the key, that there is a family lineage of desire that becomes sin that ultimately leads to death. James reiterates, do not be deceived at this point. And I think what we see here is that trial and temptation presents an opportunity for deception. That it is very easy that when we find ourselves in the midst of trials and hardships to think, this is God and why has God done this to me? And James is saying, don't fall into the trap. Do not let trials and tribulations and testing become an opportunity to blame God for something that is not His. The brokenness of the world comes down to fallen man's sin, that we broke creation through our sin, and as heirs of Adam and Eve, we propagate sin. We choose ourselves over and over and over again, and we follow our desires that gives birth to sin, and that's what causes the pain and death in the world. That we are all culpable for this pain. But the gospel moment in this is that in the midst of this, God is the author of good, that He brings about every good gift and every perfect gift, that He is the author of all of that. An interesting part of this is that it says that it comes from the Father of lights, and that is to say, God is God over everything. The ancient Jewish people saw the stars as a symbol and a sign of celestial beings, right? Angelic beings, rulers and principalities in the spiritual realm. Here James is saying that God is the Father of all of them, that He rules over everything. So every good gift is under His domain and under His sovereignty. In God there is no shadow. There is no darkness to be found, no variation that produces any kind of darkness. You will not find a situation in which God is committed to evil. In Him is no variation and no shifting shadow. James wraps up this section by saying that God in His goodness has brought us forth by the word of truth as a kind of first fruit among all creation, that we may be the sons and daughters of God. That here we are, that we get to participate in the new creation that is ongoing right now. Jesus' resurrection has shifted everything, that we have the inbreaking of the kingdom of God, and that we are participants in this inbreaking kingdom. That in the last day, Christ will return and the world will be remade, and all creation waits for this. And we get to participate in it now. We get to be a sort of first fruit, a first taste, a foretaste of what God is going to do in the new heaven and new earth when Christ reigns here over all. This passage points to our glorious hope that we don't have to worry about the pain that we face being with us forever, because it's not in God, but that we get to see God's work ongoing, and God is working in us. The temptation here is to allow the trial and the tribulation, the pain and the temptation to point us towards pointing the finger at God. The fact of the matter is, sin seeks to see our destruction, but God seeks to see our perseverance. It is His heart that we would persevere and see His good work in our lives. Thank you again for joining me. I would be so honored if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with a friend. Until next time, thank you for joining me on the Armchair Theologian.